Hello, I'm Phil Harrison, and welcome to the debut edition of Football Geeks, where I talk football with an array of fantastic guests, including authors, musicians, and everything in between. Tonight's guest hails from the West Midlands, football being a resonant feature of his life and his writing. Author of 7 books, including last year's excellent Beautiful Bridesmaids Dressed in Orange, detailing the great Dutch sides of the 1970s, a theme revisited in his new book, Dutch Masters, which explores the history of Ajax Club of Amsterdam and the birth and evolution of total football. It gives me great pleasure to be speaking tonight with Gary Thacker. Good evening, Gary. How are you, mate?
Evening, buddy. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you, and great to be on board with the Football Geeks first podcast. So yeah, I feel highly honoured.
Thank you, mate. I'm very, very excited, and may I just say it's apt that you're the debut guest on Football Geeks podcast, as I first became aware of your work on these Football Times podcast when you hosted with Scraggy and Stu Horsfield, and it quickly became a go-to bedtime listen. You guys became regular guests in the Harrison boudoir. So much so, my wife got jealous. So there we go.
God bless you for that, Mikey. Thank you. I hope in sort of in very platonic ways.
Yeah, of course. Very like Eric and Ernie on like they used to bed share in Morecambe and Wise. It was a bit like that. There was none of the funny business going on at all. So I'd like an author, a friend of mine, once told me that writing a book was a bit like eating a brick. So, I mean, that's a decent analogy. And I think you've consumed 7 already, haven't you, Gaz? So how do you go about the writing process, just as a little interesting little... So I'm sure it's a minefield of research to start with, isn't it?
I guess it all depends. I've written of the 7. One was sort of semi-autobiographical, which the first one I did. But 2 novels, which obviously are a little bit different to the football history one. Obviously, the football history one, so we talk about the England World Cup, the Dutch one, the Chelsea one, the England World Cup one, and the ones coming out today. Yeah, research is a big key. I normally sort of, when I talk to publishers, normally sort of work on in a year to get to from sort of the first. I mean, it's always difficult. The first page, the first word, the first page is the worst one. After that, it's like falling off a log after that. But so the first one, the first page to sending the manuscript off to the publishers is I work on 12 months, and it's I always sort of I write about things I like, because I've got a passion for it. So I'm a Chelsea fan, so I've written about Chelsea. I'm an England fan, I've written about England, and I'm a great advocate for Dutch football. So as I said, that's as you mentioned, the Dutch national team, 74, 78 World Cups, and the Ajax team of the early 70s, which was, I mean, you look back at those teams, and I say I'm a Chelsea fan. Chelsea's like my drug. It's the sort of temper towel, and they're going to break your heart. But look back at the Ajax team. It's like looking at a beautiful painting or a beautiful sculpture. It's a work of art. It's beautiful to look at, and all you can do is admire it and applaud it.
Yeah, I'll definitely subscribe with that, mate. Some of my fondest memories, the 1978 World Cup, as we discussed before we came online, and some of the great players they had then. But obviously, what we're talking about is going to predate that a little bit, isn't it? But yeah, great times, mate. Great times. So, with no further ado, should we dive straight in, Gaz? And
okay, far away.
Yeah, could you give us an overview as to what total football is, what it means, and what it means to you?
Do you know, it's really fascinating subject, Phil. The first chapter I've got is the book is what is total football, and I asked as well as sort of dipping into what people in various history said, like Cruyff had said about total football, and some of the Ajax players. I spoke to Ruud Krol, was great to have a conversation with a true hero of mine, and several players from the era, Per Vermeulen. Sonny Sloy played for Ajax in 2 periods across best part of a dozen years. Pete Wildschut, and a journalist such as Ork Hock, who's probably just recently wrote the Cruyff autobiography. David Winner, and I asked them all the same question. So tell me, what is total football? And I must have asked 10 people, and I got 10 different answers. And I think that just sums up that it's such a difficult concept to get hold of. And I describe in the book, it's a bit like fog. You can see it in front of you, you know what it is. But when you try to get hold of it, try to grasp it, it's gone. It's disappeared in your hands. And total football is such a difficult concept to define. And it's about changing positions. Yes, it is. It's about pressing when you haven't got the ball. Yes, it is. It's about having some players who understand each other's positions. Yes, it is. It's all that, but it's 17,000 other things as well.
Yeah.
Total football. It's a real weird, as I say, weird thing. The other part of the when I examine total football, before I get to the Ajax part of the book, is that where did it come from? Who invented total football? And you think, well, okay, it's not that difficult. Well, it's a bit like, well, what's the secret of Atlantis and what's dark matter? And what's the alchemist stone? And it's so difficult because there's so many different aspects to total football. And the probably one thing I can pin it down to is Jimmy Hogan, who was a coach in Europe, in British football, who got sort of, I said kicked out, but couldn't get a job in British football because he didn't like the kick it up in the air and chase it in the early years of the 20th century. And he went to Europe, and he went to a Dutch club called Utrecht first, and then he also worked with the Austrian Fonda team, who had what they call the Austrian whirl, which is a bit like rotating positions. He worked with the Magical Magyars, with Sebes. And so he had a great deal to do with that in Europe. But it also existed in South America. La Máquina team, River Plate, in the sort of early post-war years, had a similar sort of system. The Magical Magyars, Hidegkuti played a false nines position. And if anybody thinks that Guardiola invented it in Barcelona with Messi, and around 2000, no, guys, you're about 50 years too late. I mean, it's a really difficult concept to pick up on, but I think it means different things to different people. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. Like Jimmy Hogan, he was invited as a guest to the 1953 game, wasn't he, by the Hungarian national team?
Well, no, actually, he wasn't. He wasn't invited. He was there because he was coaching Aston Villa's youth team at the time, and he took the several players from the Aston Villa youth team to Wembley, and the Hungarians expected that Jimmy Hogan would be a guest of honour there, but he wasn't. He's just paying spectator, like everybody else. And Sebes, I think it was Sebes, I might be wrong, it might have been the chairman of the Hungarian FA, said something like, when the history of Hungarian football is written, Jimmy Hogan's name will be written in gold. That's how important they seem. But because he didn't adhere to the upper atom football that was dominant in the English leagues, he was deemed as an outsider. It's coaches like Hogan, and perhaps we'll get on to later, Jack Reynolds, Vic Buckingham, Jesse Carver, who had similar situations and went to work in Europe. And if the English FA hadn't been so blinkered, total football might have developed in the UK rather than in Europe.
Of course, I mean, there's this ongoing, and it's a perennial thing about solidity over flair in the English game, isn't it? You build a team with a spine. You don't build a team that's flexible, that can move around and can interchange positions. You build a spine, and you're 4-4-2, and that's it. You built to stop teams rather than play football.
You're right, but I mean, you look at, I mean, even a sort of semi-recent history, you look at players like Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington, Peter Osgood, Tony Curry, Alan Hudson. Again, altogether, they might have had 20 caps between them, which is crazy. These are players that, if they've been Spanish or Italian or Portuguese, they'd have had 70, 80, 90 caps. But that's how English football was in those days. And still, sadly, a little bit to this day, still remains the case, although less perhaps now.
I mean, and even moving forward, like players like Glenn Hoddle, who's even like Arsene Wenger said, like if he would have been French or Italian, he would have been well into over 100 caps, because he had that. He was the like the English Platini, wasn't he? He was
absolutely
such a great passer of the ball.
We don't trust flair. We don't trust flair.
No, it's to the detriment of the English game. Yeah, so as you say, like the British involvement to total football, that could have spelled a completely different history for our national game. So going back to total football, and What I mean, I read through your index. So I've fashioned the questions around your index.
Sure.
Yeah. So the next one would be: were there any milestones along the way that that pointed in the direction of where that type of football was leading?
Sure. Well, I mean, just sort of going quite early. Probably the major first contributor to the Ajax story is Jack Reynolds. Uncle Shaq, as they call him in Amsterdam, who was at Ajax for about 30 odd years in 2 or 3 different spells, and he created the ethos of Ajax, where all the teams, be them the youth team, right to the first team, played the same way. And this is, I mean, this is an ethos that Cruyff inherited and took to Barcelona, and to this day, Barcelona still play the same way. All the teams have the same ethos, from the junior team to the first team. They're playing the same type of football. So Jack Reynolds was probably the first one there, and he was there for for quite a long time, and he won a few championships with Ajax, made them a decent team. And the next English guy was a guy called Vic Buckingham, who was the baddest for a while, nearly completed the English double, but just fell short. And he was the guy who gave Cruyff his debut. But Dutch football at this stage, we're talking the early 60s now, Dutch football at this stage was still was very amateur. Even if there had a couple of professionals. I'm not sure whether Cruyff or Kaiser were the first professionals, but both of them had to do part-time jobs to eke out their wages. Kaiser ran a tobacconist shop. Cruyff worked in a shop and also used to sell magazines, worked at a magazine.
I was going to say, if he didn't work there, he'd probably be his best customer, wouldn't he?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, absolutely. So that was the case with Buckingham. And when Buckingham left, and then he came back afterwards. And Ajax were in trouble. They were near the bottom of the league. And
I've read that it was the worst 1964-65, the worst season in their history, wasn't it?
Correct.
They finished 13th, and they were like 3 points off relegation.
Yeah. Well, when Mikkels turned up, they won the first game under Mikkels, something like 9-3, something like that, 8-3 or 9-3. But they only won of the next 6 or 7 games that were left at the end of the season. They only won 1 or 2 more. But they persisted in Mikkels. And Mikkels, there's a story that Mikkels turned up to take over at the club in a beat-up old car. I think it was a Skoda. And Ajax was very much like that. They were a beaten up, old, falling apart, needing some TLC. But Mikkels turned them round, and they survived. And then the year after that, he took them to the championship. And we talked about the milestones of the way. And there was a couple of things in 66, 67. They won the double, domestic double in the Netherlands, and they played Liverpool in a European Cup game. And it was a game where this is Shankly's Liverpool. They just won the FA Cup.
Yeah.
And everybody expected them to roll over this team from Netherlands that nobody ever heard of, and I think Ajax beat them something like 6-1 or 5-1.
Yeah, it was a 5-1 in the fog of Amsterdam, wasn't it?
It was, and it's interesting. There's a fascinating little historical point here. It was the first time and only time Ajax have worn all white kit.
Really?
It was the first time Liverpool played in all red.
Oh, right, okay.
They used to wear red and white, but obviously because the colour clash, both teams changed. But the fog, and because Ajax were wearing all white, it was. I looked at the videos, and God bless YouTube. They look like wraiths. They look like phantoms coming in and out of vision in white, drifting out of the whiteness of the fog, and they just destroyed Liverpool. And it was like an announcement. It was like a coming out party that this is the new way of playing football. And they'd lost to actually Duke of Prague in the quarterfinals afterwards or semi-finals.
Oh yeah, it was just because they played Celtic in the semis, didn't they? Dukla. Yeah.
Correct. Duke of Prague was a big thing for Mikkels. When I spoke to Ruud Krol, he said because Krol came through a little bit later after this. But he said at the end of every season, Mikkels looked at the squad a bit like Ferguson for the hunger in players' eyes. 2 or 3 players would go and he'd bring in new players who were more wanted it more. So the following year, they won the league title again. They were becoming a dominant force in the Netherlands. But they got knocked out by Real Madrid. They were still they were a work in progress rather than the final. And then obviously in 69-70, sorry, in 68-69, they got through to the final and they played AC Milan. This is the classic AC Milan of now. And it was like a men against children. Great quote from Barry Hulsoff about this final. It says, "Sometimes you have to lose a final to win a final," and it was a finishing score. This was a team who used to winning against this team who were still not complete. So those sort of milestones on the way, and then obviously 69-70, Feyenoord beat them to the European Cup, the first Dutch team to win the European Cup. And there's a great article. There's a newspaper in the Netherlands called Dat Telegraph, and there's a guy, Jaap de Groot, who's a very famous a journalist who wrote for that, and he said, I can't remember the exact quote, but words to the effect of, "It doesn't matter whether it's Amsterdam or Rotterdam, it's a triumph for Dutch football." Well, I asked Ruud Krol about that. He didn't really agree with that sentiment. He had a slight take on it.
I think that the difference between Feyenoord and Ajax is quite key there, isn't it? Because although they had fine players at the time, Feyenoord, they were a bit more like it's a bit more about functionability and not the flair. So for them to actually gazump Ajax to the European Cup, it must have been a particular needle to Mikkel's.
Yeah, well, basically, Feyenoord had won the double the year before under a guy called, I think his name is Jan Peters. It's Peters anyway. He was a youth team coach, and they won the double, and they were into the European Cup. And basically, the Feyenoord board decided that this guy he didn't do well for them, but he wasn't really good enough to take them into Europe. So they employed Ernst Happel to take over the club. And in his first year, he took them to the final. Took them to European Cup trials. There's a fascinating game which happened about 2 or 3 weeks before the European Cup final. Ajax were winning the league, and Feyenoord needed to beat Ajax to sort of reel them in. And it was at the De Keep, which is at the De Meer, which is Ajax, his home ground, and Feyenoord were winning 3-1 with about 10-15 minutes to play. And basically, Feyenoord were playing a 4-3-3, very fluid system, whereas Mikkel's was still trying to make total football work with a 4-4-2 formation, which wasn't really functioning correctly. And I mean, Feyenoord has Janssen, so that's some really outstanding footballers there. Over Kinval, the great striker who scored the winning goal against Celtic in the cup final. Cup final. And it was an important one for both clubs. Basically, Feyenoord let the league slip. The goalkeeper made 2 mistakes, and basically got dropped for the European Cup final. But Nicholas learned a lesson from there, and after that he decided 4-3-3 was the way to play, and he bought Neeskens. He signed Neeskens for the following season, and that was the crucial game that catapulted the two teams to success. Feyenoord won the European Cup, and Ajax basically became almost like the finished article from there. So there was lots of sort of, as you say, milestones on the way, mate.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, fantastic era of football, and it's when Dutch football rose out of the ashes of kind of amateurism and moved into professionalism, wasn't it? So it started to be the prominent force in Europe, and all those central European countries. They all had a little taste of success around that time, didn't there? Some great players coming in from Belgium, like Paul van Himst, and so it was a great era. So after that, we're moving on, aren't we, to the 1970-71 campaign, where not in the league, because I think Feyenoord won the league, didn't they, that season? But certainly in the European Cup, that's when they became, if not fully realised, they were well on course to realisation. Yeah.
That again, it's a couple of crucial games there, and Ajax got to the final, and they're playing Panathinaikos, and people look at the 70-71 final and saying, well, that was the playing a Greek team, so no great shakes. But basically, Panathinaikos were coached by Ferenc Puskas at the time, and they had their centre forward Antoniotis with the top goal scorer in that year's European Cup, and Ajax had played. They got a league game against Panathinaikos, so against Feyenoord, which would decide the league title a few days before. And the Dutch FA moved the date of the fixture to allow Ajax more time to prepare for the European Cup finals. It was played in midweek, and the pitch was atrocious. Feyenoord's last game, and Ajax players were prepared for the European Cup final. Nobody wanted to get injured on the Ajax side. So basically, Feyenoord were a little bit, shall we say, robust.
Right. Okay.
Basically, but Ajax, they got their eyes on the bigger prize, and obviously they played at Wembley, and they scored quite early. And Barry Hulshoff, who'd come through the team by this stage, a wonderful player. This guy's a centre back who only played, I think, about 13 games for the Dutch national team because he had a terrible knee injury at 27, 28. This was really weak. 13 games for the Dutch national team as a centre back, scored 6 goals as a centre back. I mean, that's a striker would be proud of that national, as a centre back. But he basically Hulshoff pinged this ball about 60 or 70 yards to Kaiser out on the left, couldn't saw the defender crossed, and Van Dijk flicked a header inside the far post, and basically from that stage, Panathinaikos sort of battled. They couldn't get back in the game, and then Harry Hahn scored the winner, the decisive goal late on. So it's that victory is often sort of given less merit than it deserves because it was a great team, but you don't get to the European Cup final unless you're a bad side.
No, I think it was a very efficient performance, wasn't it? They played efficient football and they took the chances, and they didn't really let Panathinaikos. I watched the game recently; didn't really let them get a foothold in the game, and they were a dangerous side. Panathinaikos.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, they knocked out Everton, and I think it was Partizan Belgrade. Yeah. So it was the very sort of like beginnings of the fruit was being born from that. But I mean, interestingly, as a caveat to this, because I'm presently writing my own book, and I watched their first game of that campaign against 17 Nendore in Albania. And the game it was drawn 2-2 in Tirana, Kemal Stafa Stadium, but Wim Serbia scored 2 goals, didn't they? Yeah. But the first goal was synonymous with kind of like with total football, because they broke up play on the edge of the box, and within 3, like Rudy Kroll broke up play. You fed Pete Kaiser, who didn't so much pass the ball, he moved the ball on to Wim Serbia, who is playing fullback, and he's streaking through on goal. And within 7 seconds of breaking down the Nendore move, it was in the back of the net on the other end. And that's like where the journey began in Tirana, and it's and from there it went on, didn't it?
That's right. It's interesting in that final as well, because Ruud Krol broke into the team that season. He broke his leg about 3 months before the final, and obviously couldn't play. Mikkels had this situation. Horst Blankenberg was working his way into the team, and everybody thought this was going to play him there, but he didn't. What in typical total football methodology, he moved Serbia from right back to left back and played Neeskins as right back. I mean, this is because, and he had this when he brought players into the team. He always started with defenders playing 4 or 5 games in midfield first. To get them used, you have to understand other people's positions. And it's logical, really, because I always think the best footballer should be a centre half anyway, because that's where that's where it all starts, isn't it? So somebody who can get hold of the ball, somebody who can carry, and somebody who can just knock a ball. That's the basis of good attacking football, as far as I'm concerned. Definitely.
So moving on to the next campaign, I mean, it got better thereafter, didn't it? 1971-72, the campaign observed some fabulous football in Europe. So, were there any games that particularly stood out during that campaign?
I guess there's each of the campaigns, each of the three World Cup European Cup triumphs had different sort of elements of success to them. And this is obviously Mikkels had left by now. And when I spoke to Ruud Krol, he said at the time of the European Cup fight, nobody knew. He hadn't told anybody he was leaving to go to Barcelona. Right. This happened in the summer afterwards, after the European Cup final. So this is when basically they employed Stefan Kovacs. Basically, Ajax were trying to sort of get a new manager there. And legend has it, and I've had a couple of people reference this, that legend has it that they picked Kovacs because he was the cheapest option.
Right,
Kovacs didn't expect to get the job. He actually bought a return ticket from Bucharest, railway ticket to go back to Bucharest because he didn't expect to get the job, but obviously he did. And it's interesting. And in Jonathan Wilson's book, I think it's Virgin the Pyramid, Cruyff says that Ajax played the best football under Kovacs because they were freer. Kovacs took all the brakes off, and it was like watching a bobsleigh thing come down his 500 miles an hour. It was all sort of action and glory, and they played some wonderful football. And they played Inter in the final. And I interviewed a guy called Roberto Panini, who was a Dutch journalist, and he interviewed the guy, and I can't remember the guy's name, forgive me, it'll come back to me in a moment, of the Inter Milan defender who was marking Cruyff in that final. And he'd studied Cruyff, guy, the coach, and said, this is how Cruyff does, and when he does this, you got to do this. And he said, the defender said, it's like putting your hand on a pot of boiling water. It's fine the first time. You put the lid on, you put your hand, it's not too hot, but eventually you're going to get burns.
Exactly.
What happened. And there's a fascinating little fact about, and nobody ever mentions this, the famous Cruyff turn that he did against Sweden in 1974 World Cup, he actually did in this European Cup final against Inter.
Right. So that was a template for the
and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. But Cruyff scored both goals in that final. It was probably, as the finals go, it was probably their best performance. I was talking to David about this, and they played. Ajax that season played. The stripe in their shirt, middle shirt, was really narrow, and the numbers were like a compressed font.
Yeah,
and it made all the players look slimmer. It seems weird to say, but Cruyff was like an electric eel.
Yeah.
I always think about Cruyff. He's not a dribbler. He's not like George Best was, or he doesn't dribble past players. He was sways. It's like a water, just meandering past players, and he was brilliant in this game, and it was his best performance for Ajax in this game. So I think 72 was probably their best triumph.
Yeah, I would definitely kind of subscribe to that opinion. I mean, the performance against Inter in the final, especially, it was pretty faultless, wasn't it? And they, Inter had come with an agenda to wreck football, really, and Ajax they just blitzed them, really, especially in that second half. Once they got everything got going, once the machine had kind of cranked into life, they were pretty unstoppable.
They were brilliant. They were brilliant in that game, and I think it's that game that David Winner says in his book Brilliant Orange, which is a great book. They were like aliens from other planets that had a better an advanced football philosophy. Or something like that. That phrase, but he's a better wordsmith than I am.
You're pretty good yourself, though, mate. Pretty decent provider of words, and I very much enjoyed the Beautiful Bridesman, and looking very much forward to reading this one too. So as we said, I mean, the great Ajax teams left an imprint on the game that shows itself now, doesn't it? So what, in your opinion, is the legacy of Rinus and Mikkels and Ajax of this era?
That's a great question again. And there again, I asked the last chapter of the book. I asked lots of people, what's about legacy, and the best thing I could say is that they proved that beautiful football can win.
Yeah.
People look back at the European Cups. It's strange competition as much as you have teams that seem to dominate for a while. Real Madrid in the 50s, Inter, the Grand Inter team of Herrera, in the 60s. Then you have Ajax, then you have Bayern Munich, you have Liverpool under Saki. But it's a team that nobody likes. Everybody loves Ajax because they were beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful football one. It's great to have that.
That's it, mate. After an era of like cynicism, like you said, with Inter, and also kind of like the South American champions like Estudiantes and Racing Club, to have a team that just brought joy back into football after such a kind of difficult decade.
Yeah,
it was fantastic.
Yeah, that did. I mean, football becomes sort of like you get teams that become dominant, and they're dominant because they're efficient.
Yeah, and there's plenty of those about, isn't there? But there's very few kind of mold breakers.
Whereas Ajax, yeah, true, absolutely. But I mean, the Ajax team of the 70s were mold breakers. They created a new way of playing football.
Wow. That's fantastic, mate. Right, so I mean, we'll move on to the next bit, because previously I've contacted you, and we're doing a little section at the end, and this is in reference to the other great love, the drug, as you called it, of your life, Chelsea, and I asked you to compile for our little kind of end of show bit, which is called Worst Games Ever, 3 of the worst Chelsea not necessarily performances, but results that kind of bring needle to you to this day. So do you want to start listing those for us, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I could have picked 3 this season, the way that we've been playing this season. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I've looked back. So I've got the first one I'm going back to is April 2022, and this was just a few months, just under a year after Chelsea become European champions, 2021, and we were on the way to becoming world champions. So that's the context. And we played Brentford at home. This is in April. No, it wasn't April Fool's Day. It was the day afterwards. And we played Brentford at home, and Rudiger had scored just past half time to put us 1-0 up. And okay. And then all of a sudden, talk about the wheels falling off. Basically, Brentford's simply outplayed Chelsea. It was the first time they beat Chelsea since 1939. They scored 3 goals in 10 minutes just after Rudiger had scored, and they added a 4th afterwards. Christian Eriksen had come back, obviously, from his heart trauma, and they just absolutely bossed the game. And they scored 3 goals in 10 minutes, just destroyed Chelsea, and added a last one later, a last 4th goal late on. And sometimes teams just take you apart, and you have to say, well, you have to hold your hands up. And now, for a team that had won the European Cup and was on the way to winning the World Championship, to get beaten, and not disrespect to Brentford, but get beaten by 4-1 at home, it was a sobering thing. And I remember that, and it was when you were watching the goals go in. I mean, we scored 3. We go ahead. You think, okay, we're safe now. Then they equalised. Then they scored again. Then they scored again. Then you just think, well, what's going on here? But there you go.
I think fans. Well, if you're a football fan, you've had those moments of horror and disbelief when you're watching your team, and that's one thing we can all empathise with, mate. So moving on. Number 2. What's number 2 in your list?
So I'm going back even further now. I'm going back to 1972. So this is then again. Chelsea won the FA Cup in 1970. Won the Cup Winners' European Cup Winners' Cup in 71. So this is, we're another European trophy in our belts. And we're playing away to Orient, FA Cup, 4th round, I think it was.
At the old Brisbane Road, which is
the old Brisbane Road, and the pitch reflected that. And we'd actually just reached the League Cup final as well. Where we ended up losing to Stoke, but we just got to, and this was live on BBC, the Chelsea game live on BBC. I remember watching this game, and we scored. David Webb scored, and Peter Ross scored. But 2-0. You're thinking, okay, it's done then. But then we let 3 goals in the second half. And I mean, sometimes you think there's like a wave, and you think I just can't stop it. Momentum's too much.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
his fate was against us that day, and that was probably the worst game. I mean, 72, I'd be 15. I
yeah.
mean, it was
That's
heartbreaking.
yeah, and that's when like the passion burns the greatest really, because you've been freshly introduced to this world of football, and
Yeah,
you love your team more intensely, I think, at that age than you
yeah,
ever do at any stage of your life. And to see them lose is just utter heartbreak.
yeah.
Um,
And very much like the other game, I said we're on a crest of a wave. I say we won the FA Cup the year before, just won the European Cup Winners' Cup, just got to the League Cup final. You're thinking, well, okay, or it's not going to be easy, but 2-0 up. It's just, and then it just, it's just, you just watch it and you think, terrible, terrible.
Oh, mate! Oh, a comparison for I'm a Birmingham City fan, and the worst game ever for me. I mean, we just won the Carling Cup in 2011,
Yep, yep,
and we were like we needed with about 4 games left, we probably needed 2 points to stay up, and it was an away game at Wigan, and it was 1-1 until 4 minutes into injury time. Wigan were fighting amongst that relegation battle, and they scored in the last seconds of the 4 minutes overtime, and that old kind of adage comes to the fore: don't lose to the teams around you.
yeah,
And as soon as it happened, there was that panic where you think we could be in trouble here. We could be in trouble, and it came off the back of that Carling Cup win where you think the future's wide open. Next season we're in Europe. It's gonna be great. We're gonna stay in the Premier League, and that's when the shutters came down really, and everything fell apart, and it hasn't rebuilt since then. So it just goes to show you how those small historical details can
yeah.
change your destiny. You know what I mean?
You know what to say, mate? It's the hope that kills you.
The hope that kills. Oh yeah,
Yeah, I remember.
yeah,
I mean, this season when they sacked Potter and Lampard came in, Chelsea got 39 points, but they've had 9 games left. You think, okay, we've won 1 game, then we lost
yeah,
again, again. All of a sudden, you're thinking we could get relegated here. Lost,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then they won the game at Bournemouth, and it's after losing 6 games on the bounce, and you're thinking, oh, thank God for that. But
yeah.
just crazy. It's crazy, mate. How things just once
It's
you're on that sort of slippery slope, it's just like a greasy pole. You can't climb up again.
Yeah, it's almost unstoppable, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
only due to the fact that you've got decent playing staff and sort of not well. You've had an awful injury run as well this year, haven't
Oh
you?
yeah, we have, yeah. I mean,
So
but that's,
I
I mean,
think,
things when one thing goes against you, 2 or 3 things tend to sort of conspire, don't they? So that's the way it goes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully it's going to be like a comeback season, the Conte style next year, where they kind of Chelsea had a rough season, and then next season they bring in the right man, and he works with because there's some great players at the
Yeah,
club at the
British, yeah,
moment.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
funny you say that. I mean, last time Chelsea finished 12th in the league, the following
yeah.
season they won the league. So I'm just
Optimistic,
yeah,
quietly optimistic, mate.
yeah.
And okay, so moving on to the third, and I think that's the final one, isn't it? The
It is,
third
yeah, the
one.
third one, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I was almost thinking this is going to see a repeat of this a few days ago, and Chelsea played at Man City, and Guardiola put a fairly reserved team out, and Chelsea had a lot of players injured, as you mentioned. And they scored in about 15 minutes. You think this is going to be another embarrassment, but they didn't. It just went 1-0. But going back to 2019, City 6, Chelsea 0. I mean, that was the worst. Apparently, it was the worst defeat since 1991, something like that, when they lost 7-0 to Forest. And,
oh dear.
yeah, we conceded a goal to 4 minutes, and then Sterling scored, then Aguero scored, and I was thinking, oh God, here we go now. And then Ross Barkley made a mistake, and Aguero scored again, and Gundogan, and it just kept going, and eventually
Yeah.
6-0. And it's one of those things where you want to sort of say, stop now. You know,
Yeah.
5 minutes, stop now. I don't care.
Yeah, ref, blow your whistle.
Stop, yeah,
Call time on it. Yeah.
yeah. I
Oh,
mean, but yeah, so I mean, I think all football fans, need a bit of humility, and if you can't, you have to take it on the chin, and we all get beat occasionally, don't we? And if it's when you know you see on Twitter quite often you see people saying, "Oh, the ref was against us and the ref's biased against my club." No, I just grow up.
Yeah.
Sometimes we all get beat, mate, don't we? Sometimes.
That's reverting back to our 15-year-old self, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
where when things go wrong, it can't be your team. It's got to be something else.
It's somebody else. They're all against me.
Mate, it's been an absolute delight speaking to you, and thanks for being a wonderful guest, Gaz. Dutch Masters is out today. Okay, so get out there and buy it. Where's it available, mate?
You can get on Amazon if you just type my name in, Gary, Gary Thacker, Thacker. You'll find the Dutch Masters there and all my other books as well. So, yeah, it's fascinating to see today. It's at number 4 in the the European Leagues chart. Number 1 is the hot new releases. So that's very, very sort of nice to see. So, yeah, it's share my passion.
Yeah, that's
enjoyed 50 years since Ajax last won the European Cup in those 3 runs, 1971, 72, 73. So it's a great time to read the book.
Oh, great, mate. Great. Well, thank you again. It's been fantastic. Hope to have you on the show at some point in the future as well, mate.
Good luck to you.
Few ideas in the fire, but I'll let you know about those later.
Okay.
So, guys, join us next time on Football Geeks for more football talk from our exciting roster of guests. So watch this space and see you next time.